Welcome to the Westside Podcast. Each week, we'll take a relevant topic under the microscope to see what the Bible has to say about it. You will gain tools and information you need to support your faith walk and build Christ-centered families in Kansas City and beyond. I'm your host, Troy Kennedy. Well, hey, everybody. We are back with another episode of the Westside Podcast with Pastor Randy Frazee, the man, the myth, the legend. We are here to talk to you about another light topic today, something that we don't want to take lightly, but it is very common to all people. Here's the question that came in over Facebook, as we have asked. It says this: if there is really a God, then why does he let all of these bad things happen in the world? That's the perennial question,
it is.
right?
Yep.
People have been dealing with this for millennia, and a lot has been written on the topic. We're going to do our best to address this as pastors and as people who have walked with lots of other people through their own hurt and suffering in many ways. Their argument typically goes like this: Christianity teaches the existence of an all-powerful, all-good, and loving God, but how can that belief be reconciled with the horrors that occur daily? So, if there is a God, he must be either all-powerful but not good enough to want an end to evil and suffering, or he's all good but not powerful enough to bring an end to evil and suffering. Either way, the God of the Bible couldn't exist. For many people, this is not only an intellectual conundrum, but also an intensely personal problem. Their own lives are marred by tragedy, abuse, and injustice. So just the idea of just the problem of pain, the existence of evil and suffering in the world, they just seeing as a proof either for or against even the existence of God. But as pastors, that even if we come up with philosophical answers to those questions, for someone who's actually in the middle of their hurt, that's a cold comfort. That's not the kind of counsel that they need. And Randy, you've walked with lots of people through hurt, and even recently in your own family. What is sort of your posture and your approach to that?
I think, first of all, I would say that, Troy, there are two conversations here. There's the one that is the intellectual, the head, and there's the other that's the emotional or the heart. And you got to really clearly know which conversation you're having, because we will have some logic, some reasoning, intellectual responses to this that others have written, some of our own ideas. Right. But to the person who has experienced something like a tragedy in their life, an evil in their life, you talk to them very differently. And for me, my pattern is found in the book of Job. When Job's three friends came to visit him, they did their best work when they sat in the ashes with them and kept their mouths shut, and just empathized with them, held him, again, sat in the pain with him. And so I think if you're responding to somebody, answers are, don't drive into answers, but, just sit with people and be an extension of God's agent to them. Right. And in that, they will pick up a bit of the tenderness of God through your ministry to them. Then when Job's friends opened up their mouth, they were really...
It was a train wreck, right?
They were just completely wrong with why something happened to Job. They had no earthly idea. And even when Job began to question it, even though he never cursed God, he began to kind of question some things. We never cursed God. Right. And then at the end of the book, God kind of straightens him out a little bit. And so I also, the movie, one of my favorite movies is Shadowlands with C.S. Lewis, and it's the story of how he married this American lady named Joy, and he married her when he knew she had terminal cancer, and Joy had a son from a previous marriage, and in the scene, the one I like, there's several versions of it, the one with Anthony Hopkins, because he's like awesome, and they're up in the attic, by the wardrobe, the Lion Witch in the wardrobe, and the boy, he was disappointed that the wardrobe didn't actually lead to Narnia. It just was a blank wall, and he's up in this attic, and C.S. Lewis, played by Anthony, comes up, and the boy says, he was just in total, just distraught about losing his mother. I think he was maybe 10, 11, 12 years old, and he said. He says to C.S. Lewis, "I don't believe in God," and he's just crying. And C.S. Lewis says, "It's okay. it's okay. Meaning, C.S. Lewis didn't say, no, there's 3 reasons why God exists,
Right.
and they just started bawling together
Right.
in their pain. And so I just think that our job, a job of not even pastors, but a fellow follower of Christ with someone else, is to do the best work by just being there for people, holding
Right.
them. Don't try to provide answers for them. And some people, for me, Troy, for some reason, my personality, I've never gotten angry with God for the things that have happened to me or the loss in my life. I've been discouraged, I've been depressed, I've been traumatized, as I've talked about openly. But for other people, they feel a tremendous need to blame God for it. And that hasn't been my personal experience, but I see why they do.
Right.
And hopefully we can provide, in the responses that we have, we can provide some help not only for those who have an intellectual inquiry, but for those who've got some pain in their life to say, maybe my view of God needs to be altered just a little bit. But God is able, out of his deep love for us to momentarily, want to blame him for something that may not exactly be his fault.
Well, and you look through the Psalms, and what a third of the Psalms are laments.
Yeah.
I mean, and David certainly doesn't seem to hold back at all in terms of his questions, the whys, the hurts that he's having. I'm up to my neck in the waters, and they're covering me, and he's pretty clear that he's not having a good time, and at the same time, he does seem to land in that. But I'm trusting you. It's like, what did Job say? Though he slay me, yet will I trust him.
Yep.
And that's one of the things. And we'll go through some of the philosophical issues, but where I have landed just in life, it's in general, is this idea that I need to trust the character of God as revealed in Jesus more than my capacity to know his mind.
Yep. Yeah. That's good. Yeah, and aligning your understanding of what's happening in the finite world, force that to align with the goodness of God. And to be honest with you, I know this is I don't think it for me is that we're going to do this podcast and everyone's going to shut it down and like, well, that answers it. No one's going to ever ask this question before again. But my heart's at peace as to why evil happens. My heart's at peace as to how a good God can let it happen. And I'm hoping that maybe something we share might transfer to others so that they can have that confidence. But it does start with aligning your life to the fact that he's not only the one true God, but he's also a good and personal God.
Yeah.
And for me, it all lines up as much as it needs to for me to be confident. And so let's dive in.
Yeah. Well, so if I were going to ask you then, why then is there even evil in the universe?
That's good.
Why is that even a thing?
Yeah, so we go back in just the basic narrative of Scripture, and the first sign of evil was when Satan and his minions, if you will, decided to rebel against God, and that's the first sign of evil. And then God creates the current heavens and the earth, and Adam and Eve, and that evil serpent, represented by Satan, enters into the garden. So there is that sense that evil is now on the earth through the presence of Satan and his minions, here represented by a serpent. And then when Adam and Eve are tempted and they fall, sin enters into our nature, which is transferred automatically to the offspring. Thus, Cain killed Abel, probably before Abel had a chance to eventually kill him, because Abel was no less a sinner.
Right.
Cain was just acting on it first. The golden rule for sinners is, I'm going to do one unto you before you do one unto me.
Right.
And so that is the what I understand from a biblical worldview is the origin of evil comes from the rebellion of Satan, and then when we fell for his deception, that sin nature, which gives us the propensity for evil, not only cursed our ability to be in the community with God. No, God wasn't just saying, "Hey, if you don't act like I want you to," we cannot live in community with God with the evil that we have a propensity to. But it also created a curse of the earth, and the earth is now groaning as a result of the sin. So this was not a decision that God made. This was a decision that Satan made, an angel, and this is a decision that Adam made, who represented us, and that is the origin of evil as I see it. So when evil happens, that's its origin, not a God. Now the question would be, well, God, why does God let it happen is
Right.
another question. Yeah.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I've heard a few different things. One is like if Satan actually made a choice, Lucifer made a choice, and a third of the angels with him. But that doesn't seem to be where the universe got toxic until after Adam and Eve. So I mean, the way I have understood it is there's sense that Adam and Eve, they made their choice to rebel, and then it was like this idea of sin corrupted everything.
Yeah.
And what is it? Romans 12 said, even all creation is groaning,
yeah.
And waiting for the sons of God to be revealed. And so that's how I understand it. I'm not sure how that works.
Yeah.
But
that's what the narrative Scripture tells us, is that it wasn't just something, that the earth was was cursed and all that is in it. And yeah, like you say, the groaning is really good. So it's there, and you pinpoint back and said, well, okay, who made that choice?
Right.
You'd say, well, it wasn't God. This was not this was not the will of God. Although God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit anticipated it, because the Scripture tells us they already had a plan in place before it even happened, to provide redemption for what had transpired.
Well, so one of the ways I've tried to reconcile this in my own mind is this idea that Scriptures, the Apostle John says that God is love, and that love is the highest value in His created universe. But in order for love to be love, it's got to be chosen, right? So in other words, you can't be an automaton, a robot of some kind, and you be in a relationship. That's not a real thing. You can program it to act like it loves you, but it's not really love until it's chosen. So if the highest value in the universe is love, and it has to be chosen, then the reciprocal not love has got to be a possibility, right?
It has to be.
And so, if it's not a possibility, then you don't have actual love. And then somewhere along the line, then people have to have free will, actual capacity to choose one or the other.
Yep.
And if you choose the other, if you choose the rebellion, if you choose the other thing, right? So that's like the possibility of evil has got to exist for the possibility of love to be what it is.
That's brilliant. That's really brilliant. And I think someone who's listening to this might want to take it off of 1.5, go back, listen to a little slower, rehearse, rewind it back to, I don't even think you rewind things today, but anyhow, I'm revealing my age. And listen to that concept of love, because love's the driver of everything. Beautiful description of that. Beautiful.
Yeah, thanks. So in order for mankind to experience love, right, they have to have free will. In order to have free will, you have to have a choice. And God gives us a choice, right? He's a gentleman. It's like you can choose the with God life, you can choose the without God life. And that's where evil comes from. So, and here's the thing, though. It's like people, they want to blame God, and they would say, okay, you allow all this stuff to happen that is terrible, and we want to blame it all on Adam and Eve. I've had friends like in our life group go, what do you think about original sin? It's like, well, I mean, I know what the party line is, but you had an original sin.
Yeah.
And that's enough.
Yeah.
That's enough. I had an original sin, and whether you believe in an inherited nature or not, we all hurt one another. We all sin. We all degrade and slander and lie, whether you like it or not,
Yeah, we give evidence.
Right.
We give evidence that fact that sin has been transmitted, because it's 100%.
Right.
And so I believe in that because of my view of, as we talked about Trinitarian and image of God, I believe that, Adam, which means humanity, represents humanity is only one being, with multiple persons out of it. And so I believe that what happened to the being, Adam, the first, it's automatically happens to all of us born in it. And that's why born again is such an important concept, because the only way I'm going to be born out of sin is I got to be born again. And Nicodemus said, well, how can this even be? And Jesus said, it's a spiritual birth where you are no longer connected to the first Adam, but now you're connected to the second Adam. And that's the only way out of this sin experience. But like you said, even if a person says, I don't really believe that sin has been transmitted from Adam originally, and that's fine, because you do a pretty good job without Adam.
Right. You don't even need Adam.
And it's 100%.
Yeah.
It's 100%. So that's usually cause to say 100% of all humanity chooses to break the law, chooses to sin, and that's what the law is, right? The law is basically putting a label on our activity of a sense of morality, and ultimately it comes down to selfishness and hurting other people for what we want.
Right.
That's ultimately what it is. And that's really the root of all human evil, I think, is that at the very core.
And even depending on where you have your standard, everybody has got their own moral standard, right? And nobody lives up to it.
Yeah.
And I mean, it doesn't matter if you're an atheist, doesn't matter if you're a believer or Muslim or Hindu, whatever it is, everybody's got some sort of ethical standard in it, and apart from maybe the sociopath, and nobody lives up even to their own standards. And so there's this idea, there's a brokenness in our humanity, there's a brokenness in the world, there's a brokenness in the universe. And what people want to do is they want to blame God for allowing the possibility of all that hurt. The question I would say is, look, if you're going to blame God and you assume he's big enough to take care of all that stuff and to do something about it, to eradicate evil, one, can he eradicate evil without eradicating you?
Right. That's a good thing. Yeah.
Everybody has a can of bad spray. They want to spray all the bad stuff in the world and get rid of it, but they want to hold the cans.
Yeah, well, it goes back to my understanding of the story of Noah. You're talking about he'd have to eradicate you. Well, essentially, that's what kind of happened there. It's so I think the idea is that in the as I see the upper story of God, the story of Noah is a great story, because I think we mostly hear about how faithful he was to build the ark, but I don't really think that was the point, the main upper story point of the story of Noah. I think the point is that from the sin of Cain, it escalates to Genesis 6, right? And then we have the flood, and then as soon as Noah gets off the flood, his son, he's drunk in the tent, and then his son, comes in and defiles him, which might be considered to some kind of a small sin, but nonetheless, it's the germ of a sin. It means that when Noah and his family stepped off the boat, the problem wasn't solved, and I think God's sending us a message, and then it escalates. And sin, given time, sin plus time equals disaster, and we get to the Tower of Babel, where God has to separate us because we're just, and then soon after that, he limits our numbers to 120, which is a gracious move, because the longer we have to live, the worse we make it. And I think, so I think the idea is that God's saying, okay, the earth with the sons of God cohabitating with the daughters of man is the kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back. God needs to step in and do something about the evil that has emerged. And here's the point I'm going to make later on here. At some point, God does deal with evil, but then when he deals with it, we don't like when he deals with it. And when we talk about things like euthanasia and things like that, I hope we can get to some of that. So basically God said, okay, I'm going to deal with it, and we're going to start over with your best guy. Your best guy. It's one of the few times in Scripture God selects the best candidate for the job. Well, the bottom line is that Noah, who was our most righteous guy, let's start over and build with this best guy that you've got. That's
really good.
And then when Noah gets off the boat, we don't know how much. A vineyard has to grow. Next thing we know, the problem that got onto the boat got off of the boat, and we're exactly in the same spot. And that's chapter 7, of Genesis. And by chapter 12, we have to do the Tower of Babel again, and it's just showing this cycle. And so basically what God is saying, okay, the solution to evil and the solution to your broken relationship with me is not going to come from not even the best of you. It's going to come from somebody other than you, and that is Jesus. And he's going to come and represent us, and he is going to because he's the one who didn't start with sin.
Man, that's excellent. I never thought about Moses. That's pretty funny.
No,
I'm not to trivialize it by laughing, but it's just it rings true, and that's why it makes me laugh. The other piece of that is if you want to say God is big enough to stop everything without getting rid of you, then you got to, if you're going to blame him for all the bad stuff, you kind of give him credit for the good stuff.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. that's just fair. I mean, that's just illogical. It's like, okay, if he's on the hook for the bad stuff, you got to give him credit for the good stuff, but nobody wants to do that. All of the beauty and love and the music and the art and the satisfaction and the love for your children and all of the unbelievable beauty and power of the universe.
Every good thing comes from above, right? So all of that beauty and good, attribute that to God.
Yeah.
But no evil can be attributed to God.
Yeah.
And again, I know the question is not so much that God is evil, but that why does he let it happen if he's good? And, and I think at some point, we have to, a lot of times the question is asked, why does God let bad things happen to good people?
Yeah.
And that one just tees up the intellectual who knows the scriptures pretty easily. And that's why I think it was clever that the person didn't word the question that way, because, that begs the question, who's good? Why does God let bad things happen to good people? From our point of view, Romans says there's not one who is good, no, not one.
Right.
And Tim Keller said, JJ, our student pastor just gave me this from Tim Keller. I don't know if you heard, he said this phrase. He says, the only bad thing that happened to a good person actually volunteered for it.
Oh,
and
wow.
and that's a good point. The only good person, is Jesus that's walked our earth, and he's the only good person. So, and something really evil happened to him, and he actually volunteered for it. So that really starts to shift your thinking quite a bit. I don't know if we want to go there yet.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And I think we talk about love, the necessity of the possibility of evil in order for love to exist. The other piece of it, though, there's still this, why couldn't God have love and still allow all these terrible things to happen? And I think there's one thing, and it's a common philosophical fallacy, which you don't introduce to somebody who's in pain.
Yes.
But it's this idea that because I can't think of a reason, there can't be one.
Right.
So because I can't think of a reason why God allows pain and suffering, there can't be one. And that's an awful lot of confidence in your own cognitive ability. And it's also, want to look at God as if he's just sort of like a little bit higher order of a being than humanity.
Yeah.
But the God of the Bible is very different from that. We're talking about a God who speaks time, space, and matter into existence and transcends it. He's immaterial, right? He's spirit. He's atemporal. He's this eternal being that's got ultimate power and wisdom and creativity, and he creates the possibility for everything, and all of the laws of nature, like gravity and the speed of light and the strong and weak nuclear force and all these delicately balanced things in the universe, just even allow the possibility for us to exist in this little corner of the universe. It's fair to say he knows things we don't know.
Yeah.
And he's got a perspective that we can't have. And so for us to go, how dare you allow, infinite being, these things to happen, and I can't come up with the reason why you would allow this. It doesn't hold a lot of water.
No, it actually is the and again, this is now kind of shifting to the intellectual side of things. This is why this question has never really made as much sense to me. I'm not trying to dismiss it for the persons who experienced it, and I know people that are super smarter than me will go like, "You're an idiot." But I think the reason it hasn't made a whole lot of sense to me is for the reason exactly you're saying. Einstein, told his students one time, how much of your brain do you think we use? And the average is about 2%. And he said, well, I think that's a bit liberal. But what if God existed in the other 98%?
Yeah.
And I think that's a little bit to your point. It's like, is it possible that that we're finite, and even in our finiteness, we're only using 2% of our brain power, that God has given us, and that what are the chances that are you sure you want to go there given your situation compared to God? And another thing is like it doesn't disprove the existence of God. It may prove to some people that God isn't good, but I think you have to separate the two. First of all, does God exist? It could be debatable whether he needs to be good or not. And I like to give the analogy, like, remember Idi Amin, the tyrant, Uganda guy, and it would be like a citizen of Uganda back when Idi Amin was in power to because Idi Amin is evil, to deny that he existed. It's like, no, I'm pretty sure he existed, and if you deny his existence, I'm pretty sure you're going to pay for it.
Right.
So God does not for God to exist. That's one thing, and he doesn't have to be good. We don't get to design a God in our mind. God is who he is, not who we conjure him up to be. He's not a figment of our imagination. So the good news for Christianity is that God is good. Now the question becomes, how do we reconcile all of the evil? So the idea of using the idea of using the presence of evil as an argument against the existence of any God doesn't make any sense, because Greek mythology, I mean, those gods were like ornery. Ornery characters that are zapping each other and had great joy in zapping you. They're like evil, yeah, we live for it, right?
They had all the human foibles in every way, but we're talking about the God of the Bible, which is, so we don't know the reason he allows suffering to continue. But here's the thing, the Christian God shows up. Mm-hmm. We talked about this last week when we talked about kenosis, in a really powerful way, that the God of the universe, as we just described, would enter in and submit himself to his creation. God would suffer. And there's no other worldview, there's no other religious worldview in any way that allows for a God to suffer. Not only does he suffer, he suffers because he loves.
Right.
And that's utterly unique to Christianity.
Yeah.
So this idea that God would come in and enter in with the plan to redeem us, it doesn't give us all the answers as to why he allows suffering, but it tells us what they're not.
Yeah.
They're not because he wasn't willing to hurt. They're not because he was indifferent or distant, right? They're not because he didn't have empathy or doesn't care. They're not because he doesn't love us. We may not ever get a fully satisfactory answer, but just that reality there, the resource of that for someone who actually is suffering, is something that nothing else offers us in the world.
Well, and you can take that a step further, and that is that and just kind of restating what you said and then taking it another step further, is that he's the only good person who actually experienced evil, but he did experience this evil at our hands. It was humans who executed the evil. So now the tables are a bit turned on the question, right? And the reason he allowed that to happen was ultimately to save the people who did it to him. And there's something about the concept of love there, the construct of love, that begins to really bend your mind in a big way. He allowed the evil of humanity to be brought upon himself voluntarily for the purpose of saving and redeeming the very people who did it to him. And all of a sudden, this begins to soften the edges of this question in a very powerful way, because someone said that most kings send their people out to die for the king, but in our case, we have a king who sent himself out to die for his people.
Wow.
And that begins to change the paradigm of the question altogether. And I think this is where a follower of Jesus who has the Spirit within them, 1 Corinthians chapter 2, and begins to have that illumination of the Scriptures, begins to sort of be able to sort out a little bit more of this insertion that you started with of love into the equation of evil, which has to be, because it's the opposite.
Well, and then, so God, that just explains why God has a solution to the problem of suffering without eradicating you and I.
That's right.
He shows up.
He shows up. There you go. Oh, it's brilliant. That's brilliant.
And he takes it on himself.
Yeah.
So Albert Camus, who's a philosopher, he says it like this: Christ, the God-man, suffers too with patience. Evil and death can no longer be entirely imputed to him, since he suffers and dies. The night on Golgotha is so important in the history of man only because in its shadows the divinity ostensibly abandoned its traditional privilege and lived through to the end. Despair included the agony of death. This is explained by the Lama Sabachthani, the frightful doubt of Christ in agony. That's how he solves the problem without destroying us, and ultimately redeems the universe through it.
Absolutely. I think that, what I think when you look at this from the broader upper story perspective, you see that God is not the cause of evil, but God is the solution to evil once and for all.
Yeah.
And when you look at the Scriptures, you would think that if God's trying to trip us up a little bit, that he would have edited the Bible in such a way that it wouldn't have all of this presence of evil in the Old and the New Testament. God wasn't hiding from a potential follower that evil exists in the world, and he's interacting with it all the time. And I taking the story of the Amorites, where he basically issued genocide genocide, against the Amorites. But if you go back and look at the whole story, the Amorites were evil people. They were inflicting evil not only on people, but there comes a point where evil is so inculcated into a culture. We talk about cultures in business today, cultures in churches. Well, there's such a thing that multiple generations of something being propagated. You see this when you go to communities that are steeped in poverty. The people think poor. Yeah. And they have a hard time getting out of it because they have no other way to think. And so when you get into a community like the Amorites, it was the whole community thought that way, generation after generation, and people are just being devastated by it. And then they started messing with Israel. Now you're starting to mess with the upper story plan of God to bring this one God into our world to provide the solution for evil, and so God says to ultimately, hey, we need to wipe them out. And like, wow, men, women, and children. I was like, oh my gosh, is that what it really says? And like, okay, I don't know, man. Wow, that's crazy. I can't serve a God who's going to do that. But yet you go back, I think it was 600 years earlier. He said to Abraham, I'm going to give you this land. I'm going to give you this land, but I can't give it to you yet because the fullness of time is not yet. The evil of the Amorites has not reached its fullness. Yeah. What does that mean? It meant that you're going to have to be nomadic. And I'm going to put you in Egypt for 400 years because the fullness of the Amorites, it hasn't reached its fullness yet. Their evil hasn't reached a point where it's no longer acceptable. I have to deal with this evil. So God's dealing with this evil, and why was he waiting? Because he's hoping that the Amorites will turn from their ways, just like when Jonah preached to the Ninevites, they turned, and God was willing and excited to offer compassion and repentance to them, which Jonah said, that's why I didn't want to go. I knew if they would repent, you would turn around and offer them love and forgiveness. But the Amorites would have none of it. And so he waited at least 600 years before he executes this. And now today, all we talk about is not how did God, deal with evil by eliminating us, by taking us out, but we now struggle with the fact that he did deal with evil. We just didn't like the way he dealt with it. And so it's like you can't have it both ways. You got to pick your lane.
Well, and I remember I did a study on the Old Testament violence, a long time ago. And the fact is, like you said, God was patient with the Amorites. And he waited and he waited and he waited and he waited. And, today we have no problem thinking of the Allied forces going to Europe and beating down the Nazis.
That's right.
Right? So these people were of a whole other order of evil beyond even the Nazis, the kinds of things that they were doing. So without getting into the weeds on that, here's the thing. If you can't bite down on Christianity because of a question you might have like that, because you don't feel like you've got a satisfactory answer to all of the potential problems in the Old Testament and whatever, God showed up.
Right.
He showed up so that we could know him, so that we could know that he wasn't indifferent and that he was close. And if we see all of those other things through the lens of a God who wanted to show up for a solution to evil, right? And with the assumption that, someone dying is not necessarily the worst thing that could happen to them, but being separated eternally from God is. And we got a God who knows things we don't know, who has a relationship with the Amorites that we can't entirely understand, how he dealt with them, how he drew them to himself, how he revealed himself to them. God is just and he is love. And we have to assume that there's some stuff that happened there that we're not aware of.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, you said some really great things there, Troy. And I think one of the things we have to keep in mind is that the Scriptures talks a lot about judgment. And it's basically saying that Jesus is returning to judge the earth. And the reality is they say, I can't believe they got away with it. And God is saying from his timetable, no, they did not. All things will be brought to judgment. Everything will be brought to light, and everything will have its day in court, and everything will be made right. You know what I'm saying? And so the idea is that the idea is that just because you don't feel like he's dealt with it according to how you thought he should deal with it, or in the timetable he's dealt with it, it doesn't mean he's not dealing with it, and that you better be careful that you want him to deal so swiftly with evil that is executed in our world, because then he applies that to you. Don't you want a little bit of grace for the person that you hurt? If God said, okay, I'm going to do it your way for a while. Let's see how this really works. I'm not going to let any evil exist. So the next time you gossip and slander, which by the way is evil, It's evil, okay? Maybe it's not as the extent of evil you think of shooting somebody, but it's evil. That's it. I'm going to take you out, and that's how I'm going to deal with it.
Right.
And you're like, no, I don't want you to deal with my evil. I want you to deal with that evil over there. Is that fair?
We want justice when it's someone else. We
That's
want
right.
mercy when it's us.
That's exactly
mercy
right.
is a wonderful value when it's pointed in your direction.
That's exactly
but
right.
when you point it at the other person that you really don't like,
That's exactly right.
we're not so cool with it.
Yeah. And he's going to eventually deal with it. Now, fortunately for those of us who have received Christ, he's separated our sins as far as the east is from the west. This is a really amazing promise that is made to us. But in order to do that, going back to your, I think, best point of all in the podcast so far, is that Jesus entered into this and took this onto himself at our own hands so that we might have a solution from it. And a solution is coming. And I think, another thing you said, okay, that I forgot about. Because
Please tell me, because I don't remember anything.
I'm 60 years old, and if I don't get it out here really quickly, I will forget. I've already done it. I forgot it again. No, it was something that you said, about, golly gee whiz. Go on, I'm going to interrupt you again.
So we look at this. It's easy to look at the Nazis, and it's easy to look at people who do these horrifying things around the world, and they're making their choices, and it's like easy to go, okay, I understand that people make choices, people do evil things, and other people suffer because of that. All right. But what about natural evil? What about earthquakes and tsunamis and COVID-19? And, we might be blaming somebody for that. But but all these things that happen in the world that appear to be just nature gone wild and trying to take us out, and human beings suffer. Why does God allow all of that kind of suffering to occur?
I don't have as much to say about that, but here's what I do have to say about it. I think number one, we see it talked about, we see it in scriptures. We see floods, and we see prophecy related to earthquakes and wars and things like that. So we see natural issues that are emerging. And I think we go back to the notion or the idea that when evil entered into our world through Adam, it didn't just affect Adam and Eve, it affected the creation itself. And so it's groaning, it's dying itself. We know that it's dying, second law of thermodynamics, it's dying. And it's groaning. And then also I think there's a possibility as you look at the cycle of things, some people that are trying to debate this issue of climate, the climate issues and all that, says the earth is just on a cycle, and just like the leaves fall off in the winter time, and it has a cycle, so the earth as a whole has a grand cycle where it's covered in water, it's not covered in water, it does this and it does that, it freezes, it does this, it does that, and it's a cycle, and that ultimately has something to do with the natural order of things, sustainability, something probably way beyond. I'm just like not now sort of out there pontificating way beyond my certification, but
not a Dallas seminary.
Yeah, we didn't really cover that a whole lot, a little bit, but that's my pondering is that there could be, again, in our finiteness, we have yet to discover, why does a tsunami happen, in our limited sort of lower story perspective, but from a God perspective, where He's existing in the other 98%, there may be purposes for the tsunami that were baked into the deal that are just a part of it. Oh, and the thing you said is that it's not ultimately the ultimate deal from the biblical worldview is not dying. The death of this body is not the worst thing that can happen to you. That is, we got to camp on that for just a little bit, because if you're killed in a tsunami, if it wasn't the tsunami, it was going to be cancer. If it wasn't cancer, it was going to be a big truck or whatever. And I don't mean to be insensitive to that whole deal, but the giving out of your physical body is a given whenever it happens, and so that cannot be the thing you try to solve. It's not going to be solved. You've got to give up this body. It's a perishable body that Adam received, and that Jesus has provided the ultimate solution. The ultimate solution is eternal life with God in an imperishable, resurrected body in a new earth that is not dying. And once you get the end objective in mind, where God is going, you're like realizing everything is pointing to that upper story promise to us. Then all of the stuff in between becomes less of an issue, because you realize you've made the wrong thing the issue.
Oh, man. Well, and I think, too, the alternative, the godless alternative, right, isn't helpful at all. Because where do you get the idea that it's unjust? Where do you get the idea that there's such a thing as evil? You look at nature, right? Nature is red in tooth and claw, right? We got here by things, the strong eating the weak, by living things, organisms existing and suffering and hurting and dying and evolving. And, if that's the case, then there's nothing more natural in the world than nature taking some other part of nature out. Yeah. You can't get around it. And
it's brilliant.
So why do we think, though, but we don't just think that, like, we actually think it's wrong. We don't just not prefer it. I don't just dislike the fact that these happens. I actually believe that there's something objectively unjust and wrong about that. And the thing is if you don't have an objective source out here telling you that this is wrong, where are you getting that from? I mean, Martin Luther King Jr., when he was in the Birmingham jail, he wrote something I thought was really powerful. He said that, how do you know that a law is unjust? Because of a higher law, right? So, there's some higher law out there that's informing you and I that it's not supposed to be like this.
That's right.
This is actually wrong.
No, it's again, we're into the logic of this, and it makes logical sense. So, for me, if you're going to be an atheist, like you're going to go solid with this is going to be the play you make, then go pure with it, and don't call tsunamis or someone surviving and kill somebody for bread. Don't call that evil, because if there's no God, there is no morality. Right now, someone could argue that we can create our own sense of morality, and that doesn't make any sense. But pure atheists would stop blaming God because they don't believe in God. But then they got to say they're not believing in God because you don't believe he exists. But you can't say you don't believe in God because there's evil in the world, because why would you call it evil?
Why would you call it evil?
Why would you call it evil to begin with?
It's just stuff that happens and you don't like it.
Yeah, we just need to line up with some purity, and I think that's why a lot of us, it's purity to our. If we're going to go with a lane, go with it all the way and be consistent with it, which I respect that.
And if the universe is just these unguided natural forces, then there's no reason to expect anything different. We actually should be surprised when it goes well.
Yes, exactly.
We should be stunned when things are going okay. It's like, I can't believe I survived another day with everything that's out to get me.
Yeah, that's exactly
all
right.
the organisms in my body, and the weather and the sun and exposure and where they're changing and all. Everything is a grand conspiracy, but yet there's like 6 billion of us still on the planet, and we should really be surprised at
that it's going so well. It's holding together.
So well.
It holds together. I wake up and it's a Sunday. It's the sun is up again. And it's just the amazing consistency is there. I mean, but if golly gee whiz, if we're like. Like rabbit. I mean, the rabbit's got more predators than like anybody on the planet. Like, I think God, has them procreate so fast because everybody's eating them, and so I think that the idea we should be super surprised that things are going as well as they are, and I do believe that some of that is because of the intervention of a good God. Every good thing comes from above.
Well, and you could say, like, for instance, if we're going to talk about the Nazis, right? And there's human suffering that happens there, and you have one group of people that rose up, and you could argue that it was a very democratic process. They voted Hitler in, and he took over, and he did what he was going to do, and they were 51% decided that the 49% or whatever it was were wrong. And 51% decided that we should exterminate the Jews. And the 51, and the thing is we go, that's horrible. No one thinks like that. But you and I we believe in something called human rights, right? We believe that there's something that humans have rights.
Yep.
And the whole point of human rights is so that the 51% can't vote out the 49.
Yep.
51% can't vote that you no longer have the dignity of life. You no longer have the dignity of thought or freedom of speech or religion or whatever those things, that there's actually objectively existing human rights, so that the majority can't just eradicate you because they don't want to see you. Well, that's like one of those external laws again. That's a higher law beyond the other laws that you have to acknowledge everybody kind of buys into.
No, I think that is really a great point, that we can't control all evil, and God is going to ultimately right size it, but that we can, within our humanity and the morality that God transfers to us, we can stand up for human rights and we can eliminate an evil. We can deal with an evil. So one of the answers is, could a little less evil exist because I'm in the world? And I think I think of a statistic I heard about the Nazis. It's like only 5%. At the end of the day, there was this vote, but at the end of that only 5% really actually executed on the exterminated the Jews. Only 5% of the population was trying to do anything about it. 90% of the world sat and did nothing. Right. So one of the reasons why evil exists in our world, because that 90% decided not to do anything. And if they would have been more Dietrich Bonhoeffers in the world, who stood up and ultimately was hung for his attempt to try to eliminate some sort of evil in the world, that was in front of him, maybe there would be less evil. And that calls us to say, okay, we're not in 1940s anymore, we're 2021. Yeah. What would that mean for us, and what are the evils that we can enter into and help to eliminate some sort of human right violation? And I have things that come to my mind, but I think that that's the idea.
But at the end of the day, humanity agrees on a certain amount of things that we really believe they are objectively right and wrong. And that's C.S. Lewis's whole point in Mere Christianity. That's like the theme of the book. It's this idea that there is an existing moral law that exists outside of what we feel, how we feel about it. And Lewis writes, when he talks about the idea of natural evil, he says this in part of his journey to become a Christ follower. He says, "My argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got the idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing the universe with when I called it unjust? Of course, I could have given up my idea of justice by saying that it was nothing but a private idea of my own," right? You just kind of come up with your own morality. But if I did that, then my argument against God collapsed too, for the argument depended on saying that the world was really unjust, not simply that it did not happen to please my private fancies. Thus, in the very act of trying to prove that God did not exist, in other words, the whole of reality was senseless, right, unguided forces, I found I was forced to assume that one part of reality, namely my idea of justice, was full of sense. Consequently, atheism turns out to be too simple. So, once again, you don't get to an entirely satisfactory explanation of human suffering. But that leads us kind of really to the resource that Christianity brings. Yeah. That God himself would show up and suffer alongside us.
Yeah. I like the word senseless there. If I read it, how he used it, when you start to dive into a different paradigm like Lewis and like we've been chatting about here, all of a sudden it helps. It's helped me over the years as a person not to be so worked up about this. So when my mother died at the age of 62, it was very pancreatic cancer, and now more recently, which I thought was so super young, and now in the course of 6 months, I've had a brother-in-law die of a rare form of cancer, and then another brother-in-law just dropped from a heart attack. When she died, it was more like a David experience for me. I pleaded for my mom's life, much like David did, where he didn't eat and he lay prostrate on the ground. I did that on the chapel floor and just wouldn't move. And then when it became evident that this was going to happen, then all of a sudden I got up and I go like, okay, well, this is the way things go. 62 is it. I now need to let her go. I've got limited time to help my mom die. And I never found myself angry with God, because God never hid in his word that that's exactly what's going to happen. And and it says in the scriptures that our days are numbered, and I think maybe God does have a sense that he's got the date set for you, but it doesn't say that God has ordained it. I mean, I think God knows about it, but we're living in sin-filled bodies, we're living in perishable bodies, and it's just going to happen. And I remember God whispering into my spirit when I was a bit like, come on, God, why? I serve you, why not? He goes, okay, Randy, what would make you happy with me? You want me to give your mom 62? You want me to give you 20 more years with her? Would you consider that good? And you want 25? You give me the number. And I want eternity. Like, that's what I provided you.
Wow.
I'm saying, okay, different question altogether, right? And so now my hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness.
That's fantastic. And and the thing is I've always believed this, and you know, one of these days we're gonna talk about election, predestination.
Yeah, why not? Why not cover that too?
Right, but not today. But this idea that I've never believed that God causes our suffering.
Yeah.
I believe that He can redeem it.
Yeah.
I believe He allows the possibility of it.
Yeah.
And I believe He redeems it for His purposes, for something beyond. Because if God Himself suffers, that means that our suffering isn't senseless.
That's right. Suffering has a purpose in it. Suffering has a purpose in it. One of my favorite examples is in the Old Testament with Joseph, you know. God gives Joseph a dream, 2 dreams, where his brothers are going to bow down to him. Obviously, he shouldn't have shared it with his brothers because they didn't like it. And they betray him. They beat him up and sell him into slavery. And he goes 22 years of ups and downs, separated from his father. He was just a young boy.
Right.
He's terrorized. I mean, this is evil at a very, very common level. And then when 22 years later, when his brothers come and inadvertently bow down to him because they need food to survive and to live, ultimately he says to them, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. Not what God meant for evil,
Right.
but what you meant for evil to me. God had a higher purpose in the sufferings that I went through. And because I figured it out, that He brought me here and allowed me to go through what I did, to trust in Him so I would be the kind of leader for Israel that they needed, that I could be counted on. I could see God. I could see how He was with me and got me through all these difficult situations. It saved Israel. And the saving of Israel is really important because God made a promise that the Messiah would come through, whose name is Jesus. And He's basically saying, I got that somewhere along the way, which gave me the ability to forgive you. But the evil, He didn't say, came from God. The evil came from His brothers. But God took that evil and put purpose to it, to which Romans 8:28 says, we know that that for those of us who love God and are called according to His purpose, that everything's going to work out for the good. It doesn't say my good, because I would then be the judgment, like, well, God, I don't really. I think good would be I'd be a little richer or something like that. But for the ultimate good that we can't necessarily see. So where I find help for me in this personally, when it now moves away from intellect to sort of a visceral effect, is I can deal with the fact that I've seen it, that suffering has some amazing purposes in it. And you've talked to a cancer patient and said, why would God give me cancer? If you ever talked to many believers who are cancer patients who come to the end of it and say, I am so grateful for my cancer. What? Are they saying that they think cancer is evil? Yeah, they're not saying that it's like the brothers. What you meant for evil, cancer, God meant for good, because I got a couple things going for me right now. Number one, I've got my priorities straight. Number two, I got to know God a whole lot better. And number three, I'm not as afraid of the next thing that's going to come and eventually take my life, because I had to deal with it now. And my fear for you, who's never had to deal with suffering, is that you're not prepared for the inevitable, and that is this body of yours is going to give out, and the body of all the people you know is going to give out, not because God doesn't want that, but because of sin. And Jesus entered into this space for us so that we can have hope that we could rise again.
Right. And the hope that we have isn't just the fact that He entered in and suffered.
Yeah.
He entered in, He suffered, and He triumphed.
Yeah.
The resurrection hope is the resource for us as Christ followers that is unparalleled in anything. Because, see, we once again, we're not entirely sure why He allows all these things, and we know what those reasons aren't. And we also know one thing, that all the evil, injustice, and hurt, and suffering, and slander, and lies, and the fallacies of the world do not have the last word.
They do not.
Because of the resurrection hope and the promise of that hope that Jesus proved with an empty tomb. And then He showed up and He talked to everybody, and he ate breakfast with them on the beach, right? And hundreds of people saw Him, and then He ascended and He said, keep your eyes up.
Yep.
Keep looking up, right? Keep aware. Don't be down in the mud. Don't be down in the ditch. You're going to hurt. But I have overcome that hurt. I have overcome the world.
In this world you will have trouble, but have hope, because I've overcome the world.
Yeah.
And Revelation talks about a day when all of that evil is going to be thrown into the lake of fire. And those of us who have, just simply by receiving the gift of the forgiveness of sin through the blood of Christ, Romans tells us that there is now no more condemnation to us, and that all the evil that we did, let's talk about our evil for a little bit, not just the evil in the world, the evil that's in my heart, the evil that has hurt people and said things to people, or for the person listening that might have done something, you know, might have murdered somebody, might have like divorced somebody, might have been, it was just more selfish. And, and basically to say, wow, I'm just so glad that there is a merciful God out there, and my sin will be cast into the lake of fire, but that I will not be condemned for it. That, golly, you got to really focus on that.
And it brings about redemption not just for you and I, but restoration for his universe.
Yeah.
For heavens and the earth are
Yeah.
going to be made whole. They're going to be as they were intended to
Yeah.
be. That's the resurrection hope. That's the Christian hope. It's about you and I finally integrated in harmony with everything as it was made
That's
to
right.
be. And I love this in the Lord of the Rings. Because I'm that nerd.
Yeah,
I'm that
okay.
guy.
I'm going to let you go there.
At the end of the book, Sam Gamgee, he discovers that Gandalf, his friend, was not dead, but alive. And he cries, he says this is beautiful. He says, I thought you were dead, but then I thought I was dead myself. Is everything sad going to come untrue? Mm-hmm. And the Christian answer is yes.
Yes, exactly right.
Everything sad is going to come untrue because it's going to be redeemed. Lewis writes and he says this of temporal suffering, no future bliss can make up for it, not knowing that heaven, once attained, will work backwards and turn even that agony into a glory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know with C.S. Lewis, he said back to the movie Shadowlands, a big theme of the movie was this phrase, with Joyce dying of cancer.
Right.
He said, basically, the joy now is the pain then, meaning the joy we have of being, if you enter into a relationship like he did with Joy, and he had joy with her, basically you've signed up for pain because one of you is going to die. Mm-hmm. And the only way you can eliminate that kind of pain is to never enter into the joy of community, to enter into the joy of companionship. But then he got to the end of the movie and said, but the pain now is the joy then, meaning that, we have this pain now, but because of Christ, there's going to be this ultimate restoration, and we're going to experience this joy, which is a fascinating idea. And so you've got to really focus your paradigm on the big idea of the Scripture, of what Jesus ultimately solved for us. And there is not only the elimination of evil amongst humans, but the cursing of the earth, as you mentioned, is going to be, there's a Revelation, there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth, and it's going to stop groaning, for crying out loud. And that's going to be a cool thing. And Paul and the writers of the epistles encourage us, we don't sit around and talk about that enough. Mm-hmm. And so therefore we get lost in the muck and the mire of the lower story, and it causes us to focus, and even, if I dare might say, have the audacity to do what what Job did, and maybe challenge God with the not knowing. And it's really interesting with the Job story, the contract that God made with Satan. It's like, holy smokes, what is that all about? And Job's life was restored in this life, and yet Job was never told the why. Why did it all happen to begin with? And the really good news is it was chosen because Job was considered a righteous dude. And he was selected because, God let him go through, it appears to me God let him go through that. It had enormous purpose in it, so that people like us today who go through suffering read the book of Job and get so much out of it, and it served an enormous amount of purpose.
So God enters into the universe. He submits himself to his own creation.
Yep.
He humbles himself to become like his own creation, and he suffers. But the suffering doesn't have the last word with Jesus, and it doesn't have the last word with those of us who are in Christ. That is the Christian hope. And that's what we wanted to point to you today. We just, there's all the intellectual issues and there are rational problems, and, philosophers have been debating those things for millennia. But maybe you're really hurting right now. Maybe you're really going through your own version of a Holocaust. And I just want to say, God has come close. He is near to you, to the brokenhearted. He is near to the contrite in heart. He's not going to snuff you out. He's going to be present. He's going to be close. And he understands like you can't possibly imagine. And so our prayer for you is that you would get your head up. You get your eyes up and fix them on Jesus, the author and perfecter, the finisher, the completer of our faith, for your hope in a world that can't offer that to you. Randy, thank you so much, my friend.
Yeah.
Always appreciate these conversations.
Yeah, these are good conversations. We don't overly plan them. We just kind of both kind of you lay it out, and I think God shows up and helps us through this in a way that we can have a little bit of intellect there, share some wisdom from other folks, and yet trust that we're also ministering to people who these topics affect them in a deep, visceral way.
Yeah.
So thank you, my friend.
Well, thanks to everybody who is listening or watching, and we would ask you to continue to submit your questions and those things that are weighing on your heart, and we will do our best in future episodes to try and address them. God bless you. Have an amazing week. We hope the conversation has challenged you and perhaps sparked some new ideas. If you'd like some additional notes and helpful links, visit the episode page at westsidefamily.church/podcast. And if you have questions, we'd love to hear them. Our last episode of the season, we'll devote an entire show to your questions. So you can also tell us what topics you'd like to hear and discussed in the future. Thank you for joining us today, and God bless you.